In Latin America, three waves of populism from 1929. Contemporary era left-wing populism in Latin America. The rise of populism in Latin America. MUD. Latin America has the strongest historical traditions of left-wing populism, and the region is home to some of the strongest left-wing movements in the world. This is due to higher levels of socio-economic inequality in the region, which has made left-wing populism a staple of the political sphere for some time. Latin America has experienced three waves of populist movements in its modern history. The Great Depression of 1929 to 1960 caused a crisis of incorporation in the region, with rising rates of migration from rural to urban areas, and the implementation of economic agendas led to demands for rights. This was the initial era of leftist populism in countries like Argentina, Brazil and Ecuador. MUD. The era of import substitution industrialization, IC, was associated with a nationalistic leftist agenda advocating for socio-economic development through state-led initiatives and social democratic reforms. This model was associated with the peasant and working classes, while the elite was a national oligarchic class subservient to international capitalist forces. The Latin American populist left was strongly supportive of the notion that class consciousness and politics was the predominant cleavage along which the electorate should mobilize. This model was based on mass populist parties led by charismatic leaders, who headed social movements that revolved around a fluid and unstable coalition of trade unions and different factions within the electorate. The conflict lines in Latin American society were based on the labor-capital cleavage. The second wave of populism emerged in the early 1990s due to economic crises, where populist leaders were able to gain electoral victories by blaming the elite. This second wave was characterized by an elite-driven backlash to the highly state-centric and isolationist model of the IC era. The third wave of populism was ushered in with the 1998 victory of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, which subsequently spread to a number of countries. This third wave was characterized by an elite-driven backlash to the highly state-centric and isolationist model of the IC era. This wave of populist leaders is characterized by an anti-neoliberal, anti-American populism rooted in 21st century socialism. They view themselves as radical leftists dedicated to fighting against excessive free market reforms and neoliberalism with the aim of uplifting the poorest in society. They view the people as those who have been exploited and discriminated against, while the elite as a financial elite and Western powers with imperialist ambitions. They are committed to the expansion of democratic rights and the establishment of participatory democracy. Contemporary causes: social inequality, neoliberalism, electoral politics, indigenous rights, social inequality. Historically speaking, the region has had some of the highest levels of social inequality in the world. This continues to be the case today. History of colonialism and the influence of colonial institutions on long-term development. Emergence of neoliberalism. Dependency theory. Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a key concept in populism literature, and its dominance has led to the rise of support for populist parties. This has been attributed to the dominance of the neoliberal economic system paradigm that now constitutes the economic system of the majority of countries. Populism is a term used to refer to the post-1980s economic regime popularized in the US and UK. Neoliberalism is an economic and political ideology that emphasizes deregulation, privatization, austerity measures, rolling back of state services, and financialization. It advocates for individual freedom and expression and the support of markets as the best means to expand individual freedom and success. It has been critiqued for its tendency to create high levels of economic and income inequality, its subversion of the political realm to the economic realm, and its hostility towards organized labor. The model has been criticized for creating rising levels of informal and precarious work and unemployment, assaulting the welfare state, and expanding private alternatives. It has also been criticized for concentrating power in the hands of financial elite and multinational corporations and international organizations, which increasingly encroach on national states' domestic affairs. Electoral politics. the institutionalization of electoral politics and the use of elections as a main way through which to organize the political sphere provided new party families like the populist left with the ability to compete for office, a process from which they were previously excluded. This, coupled with declining levels of support for center-right parties, provided new opportunities for parties to craft new electoral coalitions. The struggle for indigenous rights. The struggle for indigenous rights is rooted in the region's colonial past and the institutionalization of exploitative and racially based hierarchies imposed by Spanish and Portuguese colonizers, which have had lasting effects on both the treatment and livelihoods of the region's indigenous populations. Indigenous people have historically been excluded from the national political affairs of countries in the region, and it is since the 1990s that large-scale indigenous social movements have erupted and have demanded the rights of sovereignty and self-determination. In the modern era, indigenous protest movements have achieved various degrees of success in having their demands met and by increasing the extent to which they have become represented within national politics. It has often been through the populist left, for example in Bolivia, that such movements have found more success in the political realm. Social inequality. Historically speaking, the region has had some of the highest levels of social inequality in the world. This continues to be the case today. History of colonialism and the influence of colonial institutions on long-term development. Emergence of neoliberalism. Dependency theory. 3 types of regimes: orthodox, statist, heterodox, and democratic governance: liberal democratic, radical democratic, plebiscitarian. In particular, 3 types of economic policy regimes have been implemented by these actors according to Levitsky and Way, 2011. Orthodox regimes, statist regimes, heterodox regimes. First, orthodox regimes in Brazil are those that adhere to neoliberalism and make investments in social policies to reduce inequality, such as privatization and trade liberalization. Examples include the Bolsa Familia and the PT. Second, statist regimes are characterized by high levels of state control of the economy and policies, such as nationalization, creation of state-run firms, regulation of FDI, and investments in social policy. Lastly, heterodox regimes such as those under Rafael Correa in Ecuador engage in both orthodox and measures. The varieties of left populist rule in the 21st century have differed in their models of democratic governance, with liberal democratic regimes institutionalizing pluralism and radical democratic regimes combining it with new channels of popular participation. Question 4. What are the key causes and characteristics of right-wing populism, and to what extent are these factors similar different in the global north and global south contexts? Typology of the populist right. In the European context, there are several varieties of right-wing populist parties. Palinka 2013. The first are right-wing populist parties with or without pre-populist roots. An example of a populist party with pre-populist roots is the Austrian FPO Die RSS, which is rooted in a pan-German tradition which ultimately became a centerpiece for Nazism in the 20th century. An example of a populist party without pre-populist roots is the Dutch PVV, which emerged in the aftermath of the brief success of PIM Fortuyn as a largely single-issue party focused on anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim agendas. The second are right-wing populist parties with a national revisionist agenda. The most extreme right-wing populist parties in Europe are those that have a history of or are rooted in support for the continent's history with fascism and leaders such as Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler. The revisionism of these parties often entails either a disapproval of the outcome of the Second World War or in the expression of an idealized past under fascist governance and an explicit rejection of liberal democracy and the concept of universal human rights. These parties are highly xenophobic and openly racist in ideology and advocate for their agendas on the grounds of racial and ethnic superiority. Examples of these parties include the German NPD, the Golden Dawn in Greece, and the British National Party in the Question 3. Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses.